Is there any way of forecasting, what else climate change could be causing, around the country, around the world in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. It gets at this issue of what we call attribution. We're seeing this increasingly more extreme weather, whether it's record heat like we saw this summer here in the U.S., or record drought, like again we saw this summer, or record storms, like Sandy, which was the largest, storm system of its type we've ever seen. It was the lowest central pressure. The central pressure, how low the sea level pressure at the center of a storm is a measure of its intensity. And this storm had the lowest central pressure that we've ever seen north of Cape Hatteras. So there were aspects of this storm that were unprecedented. There are other aspects of what we've seen recently that are unprecedented, be it the record heat and drought this summer, the record decline in Arctic sea ice. And some of these things may not be unconnected. Some scientists, and this is very speculative, it's not yet a consensus of the scientific community, but there's some published research that suggests that part of why Sandy took the trajectory that it took, rather than heading out to sea, heading out into the Atlantic, as these storms often do, it headed inland, actually towards us, towards Pennsylvania, through New Jersey and then into Pennsylvania. It had this unusual track, and some scientists have connected that to a larger scale pattern of the jet stream that has prevailed this fall. And in fact, they've shown that particular pattern of the jet stream, the technical term, we call it the negative phase of the Arctic oscillation pattern. But it's basically this unusual configuration of the jet stream that led to winds that were sort of pushing that hurricane inland. And they have shown that those conditions are favored when you have an ice-free Arctic, because it turns out that the Arctic Ocean stores a lot of heat, and in the fall, when all these cold air systems begin to form, you have this very warm ocean underneath very cold air that leads to an unstable atmosphere and an attempt by the ocean to transmit heat into the atmosphere. That actually changes the pattern of the jet stream, and it turns out that can be shown to favor this negative Arctic oscillation pattern. Well, that record low level of sea ice in the Arctic was, we know that was connected to the overall warming of the Arctic, the overall warming of the globe. So the record-setting, retreat of sea ice in the Arctic this summer may not be unrelated to this other unprecedented event, the trajectory that Sandy took. What it's telling us is that, when it comes to any single event, of course, we can't say that event, like Hurricane Katrina was caused by climate change. It's no different than a loaded die, a six-sided die. If you erase the 5 and replace it with a 6, and you start rolling that die, 6s will now come up twice as often as they should. Rather than 1 in 6, it'll now be 1 in 3 rolls that gives you a 6. Now, you won't be able to point to any one of those rolls and say it was due to the loading of the die. But when you step back and you look at the fact that 6s are coming up twice as often as they should, you are seeing the loading of the dice. And with the extreme weather we're seeing here in the U.S. and in many parts of the world, we are seeing the loading of the weather dice by climate change. And it will only, get worse. This is really the tip of the iceberg as far as what we're likely to see if we continue on the course that we're on with fossil fuel burning. If we warm the globe more than 2 degrees Celsius, 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit relative to pre-industrial time, we're already almost halfway there. And if we, persist with another decade of business as usual, we may be committed to warming the globe more than that amount. And what climate scientists who have looked at the impacts of climate change have said is that once we warm the globe above that amount, we really start to see some of the most severe impacts of climate change. So there's still time to turn the ship around, to right our course, but there isn't a whole lot of time if we're to avert some of these more dangerous impacts on our climate and our planet.
Can you make any if you could make a suggestion as what needs to be done, what can people start doing? What does maybe just even just within the U.S. what needs to be done to make that change?
That's another great question. There are various things we can do, and there's no one magic bullet when it comes to solving this problem. There are several different things we need to be doing. One of them is voluntary. We should all be doing those things that we know we should be doing anyway, because they're better for the environment, because they save us money, they make us healthier. Biking to work rather than not in snow like this, but using public transportation when possible, recycling, using low energy appliances. In our case, we here in central Pennsylvania can purchase all of our energy from wind power alone. That's an option that we have with our energy provider. So we can all make these various personal choices that will reduce our carbon footprint, but they'll also make us healthier and happier and save us money. But that alone isn't enough to make the sort of dent that we need to make into the problem. And what that means is that we do need policy. We need policy at the highest level that incentivizes a shift away from those practices, reliance on carbon-based energy, on fossil fuel energy that we know is having this detrimental impact on our environment. We need to incentivize the transition away from fossil fuel energy towards renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal, etc. There's no reason that we can't do that through free market principles. And again, as I alluded to earlier, there are conservative groups now that are saying we need to solve this problem. We need to do it through market incentives, using the free market. And I fully endorse that viewpoint. There's no problem with the free market solving this problem. There's no obstacle to the free market solving the problem. But what we need to do is to make sure that the market is operating on a level playing field. And right now, because we're not incorporating the cost of fossil fuel burning, the damage it's doing to the planet, in that cost-benefit analysis, we are giving it sort of an unfair advantage over other sources of energy, like wind and solar, that are not degrading our environment in the same way. We need to put in place an incentive structure that levels that playing field. And whether that's through a cap-and-trade system or a carbon tax or a fee and dividend that is actually favored by many conservatives, there's a worthy debate to be had about how to do this. But the bottom line is we do need to find a way to put in place that incentive structure so that we naturally make decisions about our energy and where we get our energy that moves us away from this current system we're locked into, where we are perhaps benefiting from cheap fossil fuel energy, but at the cost of future generations who will truly bear the brunt of the climate changes that we are putting into the pipeline today.
Wow. Well, it's fascinating, I have to say, for someone who knows it on a basic level and is always trying to find out more. I truly appreciate it, and thank you so much for joining me again today.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.
Excellent. And for statecollege.com, I'm Laura Nichols.